We're talking today with Rabbi Leib Tropper about Ahavas Yisroel. In previous generations, the great Torah leaders were known as Ahavas Yisroel, those who loved Klal Yisrael. Not only Klal Yisrael, but Reb Yisrael as well, the individual as well as the entire people. Can you talk to us, Rabbi Tropper, about a Torah perspective on the concept of Ahavas Yisroel?
Thank you, Peretz. It really is something that, though it's germane, particularly now because of the 9 days and 3 weeks and everything that we are living through, and in this time, in this kufa, this period of Rosh Chodesh Av till Tisha B'Av, which is Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam, and that itself needs to be defined. What Sinas Chinam is, as the Netziv in Daf Tes in Yuma, it talks about what that actually means. Sinas Chinam in the Gra, in the Emunah B'Hashgacha, which we'll talk about perhaps a little bit later. What the Gra says, what that means, Sinas Chinam. But as you mentioned, the adjective of Ahavas Yisroel, endowed to Ahavas Yisroel, endowed to special people like the Chafetz Chaim and great Rebbes and great people, Gedolei Yisrael, who were really Ahavas Yisroel, loved every Jew. It wasn't a group, an organization, Ahavas Yisroel club, an Ahavas Yisroel organization where people had agendas. They were. It was a cause. It wasn't just a cause. It was Ahavas Halavavas. It was a duty of their heart, as the Torah commands us, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. I guess the profundity of that mitzvah and the significance of that mitzvah is that the Chafetz Chaim wrote a sefer, Mishnah 6 volumes, but he also wrote a sefer called Ahavas Yisroel, which is only a few pages. And in this sefer, he writes that the main reason we are still living Monsey, Lakewood, Passaic, California, Chicago, is no other than we are not fulfilling the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisroel properly, and we are living in some way with Sinas Chinam. We are living with hating others. I don't know if hating means rage. Well, we'll talk about all those things if we have. I'm just sharing a perspective. I do not have the perspective. I have a perspective. But I will share with you what I do know. Ahavas Yisroel, loving a Jew, has to be an expression of the Leib, of the heart. It cannot be just something you do because, as people would say, I'm into Ahavas Yisroel. That is not into Ahavas Yisroel. That is just not. Ahavas Yisroel needs to be worked on. A lot of labor. It's very laborious, intellectually and emotionally, learning the Sfarim, learning what the Chafetz Chaim says, learning what the Rishonim tell us, learning what they all teach us about what it means to be a true Ohev Yisrael. The Yad Rimah in Sanhedrin writes about the pasuk V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which seems to imply, which is clear, that says you should love either your neighbor, your friend, your whatever words people use to define V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. The Yad Rimah adds something, a nuance that perhaps we're not familiar with. So we may be familiar with the concept, but that is part of the mitzvah of Ahavta l'reacha kamocha, I think is unfamiliar to most. The Yad Rimah says, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. The word reacha does not mean your friend, your neighbor, another Jew only. It means l'ra'im shebecha, even the bad people within you. You are supposed to have Ahavas Yisroel, to love them as gifts of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Klal Yisrael, and of course, not embrace their evil habits or evil actions. But v'havta l're'acha kamocha, You should love the royim shebecha. The my Rosh Yeshiva Zecher Tzadik Levracha Moran Hagoyin Reb Chaim Pinchas Scheinberg would always talk about the chesed that there is even in justice. Klal Yisrael has that chesed in justice. The Gemara says when you find you mixed up people who are mechuyev, different various kinds of misa. One kind is more severe. One they're obligated to suffer capital punishment, and they get mixed up and confused. You don't know who's who. So v'hafta l'reyacha kamocha tells us that we have to give them a misa kala, the most lenient and the most painless death penalty. So even when you're executing someone. Now let's just look at this picture, executing somebody. Somebody is a Machalol Shabbos Barabim. He is warned. Two kosher witnesses warn him and tell him that if you do what you want to do, you're going to suffer the death penalty. And they described to him what kind of a death penalty. Skila, you'd be thrown off a roof. And you're going to whatever other part that comes with that. You're going to suffer that death. And he says, I don't care. That person, the Torah tells us, Baror loy misa yafe. If he gets mixed up with others, v'hafta l'reyacha kamocha, choose the most lenient and most painless way of death. Somebody was so antagonistic and almost reviles the Torah in a certain sense. By telling you, I'm going to do it anyway. Even he deserves some kind of a ahava, love from other Yidden in Klal Yisrael. This is something that we could all talk about, and it's good conversation, but it's also, most important, a mitzvah aseh d'oraisa that we must fulfill and learn to fulfill. When I say learn to fulfill, there is a book. It's called The Art of Loving, written by a Yid who was once very frum, observant. He had actually he had a office was called the Torah clinic for psychotherapy. His name was Eric Fromm. His father was a Rav. Eric Fromm became an atheist as a student of Freud or a friend of Freud. He became an atheist. Actually, I still have the New York Times article when he died, not many years ago. He asked to be cremated. So it was a denial of one of the most important principles of Yid Gimel Ikarim of the Rambam. That makes a Yid. Makes a Jew into a Jew, to believe in the resurrection of the dead. But the title of his book is very telling and very meaningful. Like as I say again, Lahavdil ben Kodesh L'chol. The art of loving is based on the premise that loving, ahava, is not something that you just have. I'm into. It's not just a concept. It's something you learn, like you learn how to play music. The art, but it's not music, it's the art of loving. Not the art of beautiful paintings, it's the art of loving. But just like the other arts, the person that learns them, he's taught, he's trained to love another Yid, another person. So, loving must require a lot of learning, introspection, internalization, and action. It cannot stop in the cardiac level where you just have a person feeling for another Jew but not reacting. There is a law in the Torah, negative commandment in the Torah, Lo sa'amoid al dam re'acha. Do not stand idly by your brother's blood. If chas v'shalom, someone is suffering painfully, somebody is being beaten and is bleeding, don't stand idly by. And the Chazon Ish asks, if you sit and daven for him, then at that point you're a murderer. You have to go and do some action to help him. Imagine somebody drowning in a river and a person says, Shema, Tehillim, whatever he says, that's called, he's an accomplice in murder of this person who's drowning or suffering. It means it takes action. So, the Mashgiach, I heard this from my Rebbe, Zechrein Levracha, Moran Rav Tuvia Goldstein, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. He said that it doesn't, he had a Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael Baczynski was the Mashgiach in Branovich. That was the yeshiva where Rabbi Chanan was the Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. And he says if somebody watches sometimes another person drowning or getting just beaten, sometimes he cannot help. But the Torah still tells you to stay idly by and not react, not scream, not cry. That is a negative commandment. And that apathy that is created by just standing by and not reacting to it, creates such a distance between another Jew and ourselves. You may not be able to help all the time, but to stand idly by, not to cry for another Yid, not to be pained by another Yid, your life go on as usual. I was very impressed as a Bacher in Eretz Yisrael. I was once listening to the radio. There's an accident happened. A helicopter with 3 soldiers crashed. So the radio that day, this goes back in 1967, 66, the radio that day did not play any music. The national radio in Israel did not play any music because it was a day of mourning. Of course, what could you do? None of us could help, but to stand idly by and to just be totally, to have this distance and this apathy and this callousness about another's pain, that is really, not only is it a bittul mitzvahs aseh, not only am I disregarding a Torah commandment of v'ahavta l'recha kamecha, we are violating a commandment of l'samad al dam re'echa even if we cannot help, but if we just let ourselves be apathetic about it. There are stories and stories and stories about Ahavas Yisroel, of Gedol Yisrael, doing things for others in a very sacrificial way. They gave their sometimes lives to help another Yid. I think they say the Pisetzner Rebbe, I think in the Sefer I saw it, there's a biography of the Pisetzner Rebbe. He said that if I'm only zeichet to love another Yid, I really feel that the Eibishter will really love me. If all I do in this world is love Yidden, another Jew, then I feel I've accomplished so much and such great things. We minimize this concept of loving because we don't know what loving really is. We think loving is something kind of romantic, emotional reaction one to another. It's much deeper than that. It does have requirements, and the Rambam writes talking about somebody in a positive way. Talmidei Chachamim, talking about friends, talking about your neighbors, always there to help them.